Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for an Awake Security webinar titled Who's in the Browser? Exploring Malicious Browser Extensions and Data Mining. Chrome and other browsers are these days on pretty much most devices. Perhaps more importantly, they have become the new operating system, as most of the apps we use sit within the browser. It begs the question then, what are the attackers thinking about this? Luckily for us, we have someone that knows this firsthand. Eric Poynton is the lead network threat hunter at Awake Security. He successfully discovers and investigates compromised IoT managed and unmanaged devices and enterprise networks on a nearly daily basis. And one of the things he finds a lot of is malicious and suspect Chrome extensions. Today, he will share that perspective with us, as well as educate us on how security professionals should think about mitigating this threat. If you have questions or technical difficulties, please use the Q&A and chat feature in Zoom. With that said, Eric, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Rudy. I appreciate the introduction. And yeah, welcome everybody. Thanks for taking time out of your day to join us in this talk about browser extensions. So quickly, we'll quickly go through a little agenda here. So first up, who am I? Who am I, and why am I up here talking to you guys about this today? We'll go through what browser extensions are, where they can be downloaded from, how popular they are, the overall threat model, and then some mitigation techniques that you guys can take home and apply to your enterprises. So a bit of a background on myself and why I'm up here today. So I approached this topic as a threat hunter and incident responder. I first started my career in InfoSec as a security consultant, mainly focused on penetration testing of systems and web applications. And that evolved out of my position as a web developer and search engine optimizer, while still at the University of Pittsburgh getting my degree in economics. I then went on to become one of Darktrace's first engineers in the United States. And after spending some time there, I switched over to threat intelligence, where I soon became the lead analyst for the United States. Now I'm at Awake, where I've led the threat hunting team for the last 18 months or so. So a lot of my time has been spent utilizing artificial intelligence for the sake of catching malicious actors both inside and out. And so during my time at Awake, I've actually focused a lot of my research on browser extensions, and I've even built some of my own to understand their capabilities and potential for use and misuse. And so over the course of this research, I've really uncovered some very interesting data points, many of which I'll share with you today throughout this presentation. So, why are we even talking about Chrome extensions, right? And you don't really have to take my word for it as to the problem that they pose. Here's just a list of some article titles from some vendors that we know and love, like Wired and Forbes, and Trend Micro and ZDNet. That all kind of point out that this is a pretty big problem that we're facing. So without further ado, what are browser extensions? Simply put, browser extensions are small software programs that customize the browsing experience. And they enable users to tailor Chrome's functionality and behavior to individual needs or preferences. And these are just built on existing web technologies such as HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. And for those of you that are familiar with these languages, you understand how powerful JavaScript can be. So we'll see that they have plenty of capabilities. So where do these extensions come from? The official answer is the Google Chrome Web Store. And this is where the sanctioned store for users to go and download their extensions and add them to their browsers. But what I've noticed in a lot of my research is many malicious extensions, which some of them are available on the Chrome store and some are not, but they can be downloaded through a number of other ways. It's not just specifically through the Chrome store. We can do it in a number of ways, whether it's attached to an ad, as a part of malvertising, or you get one bundled in a phishing email, or bundled with other questionable or free programs, otherwise known as freeware. So how popular are browser extensions? And so my most recent scan of the Chrome store listed a little over 200,000 Chrome extensions. I believe the number was somewhere between 215,000 and 220,000 Chrome extensions. But the interesting thing here is that only a very small portion of these extensions are actually downloaded and use on a regular basis. In fact, only 13 of them have been downloaded more than 10 million times. And so, about 90% of them have less than 1,000 downloads. 50% of the extensions on the Chrome store have less than 16 downloads. 13.5% have one download. So I think that's a pretty interesting figure in and of itself. And 10% have zero downloads, right? So there's about 20,000 extensions that are on there with absolutely no users or nobody, even paying attention to them. So that's kind of interesting. And as far as, my research has gone, it's been just about every single, corporate environment that I've looked at over the last few years has browser extensions installed with them. So let's go over the kind of threat model here. Let's first take a look at the permissions, otherwise known as kind of capabilities. And then we'll look at how we can go about hunting for these extensions within corporate environments. And then we'll take a look at some use cases, such as querying the Active Directory with an extension. We'll take a look at some unregistered extensions. And then we'll see how they're tracking users' internet searches and activities, as well as monetizing users' data. So extensions, in order to function and go about their business, they need to have read and write capabilities, right? Their whole purpose is to modify the Chrome experience or the browsing experience, and so as such, they need to be able to change the browsing experience to do so. And so the interesting thing here is, more and more businesses go through. They're really accessing all of their corporate data through the browser, right? When you think of O365, where your emails live, now that's where your corporate Word documents live, your Excel sheets, and PowerPoints, and so on and so forth. They're all in, that's all accessed through the browser. And if it's accessed through the browser, the extension has access to it. So you no longer have privacy when it comes to your emails, your Excel sheets, your Word documents, your PowerPoints, and things of the nature. And so what I've really noticed, and I think what has really caused me to dive down into these, dive down into some deep research into these extensions, is because they're harvesting a lot of sensitive user system information, such as your IP addresses, your geolocation, and the geolocation is pretty interesting because it'll actually be as specific as pointing me to the actual cul-de-sac that you live at. So I might not get your house, but I can say confidently that you're one of these three houses. The ISP information, your internet service provider, do you have Comcast, do you have Verizon, and Spectrum, and what have you. Also your company information, right? So when we're in a corporate environment, it'll give me information about your company as well. Your browser and operating system information, that's very useful, especially when one considers just the amount of vulnerable software that's out there. So that's very good information to have for an attacker. And not only that, we're looking at all of your internet search queries, your browsing histories, and even more data points, really. And so a lot of this really allows, opens up the door for a lot of problems, right? If somebody knows exactly where you're located, right, who you work for, and what you spend your time doing on the browser, that's all information that can be very well used for the crafting of, phishing emails. And phishing emails are one of the most popular ways that companies get compromised now. So that's something to kind of think about and keep in the back of your head. So another thing, right, is myself and other security practitioners are advocating for the usage of password managers, where you have one very, very strong master password, and then that opens you up into a secure and encrypted vault full of your other usernames and passwords. And typically these allow you to create very strong, random, and unique passwords for each account, and thereby really helping the personal and corporate security in that regard with passwords. But the interesting thing here is that when you have access to the clipboard, that is how you're going to when you have access to the clipboard, that really kind of nullifies password managers, because the vast majority of times when you utilize a password manager, you're using the copy and paste function for those passwords, right? You're not going to type out a 22-character long password. You're going to hit the copy and paste functionality. And not only that, a lot of password managers actually have extensions that you can utilize within the browser. And so there you go. Your malicious extension can easily read that and harvest all of that. So there goes your passwords as well. And then the other thing is, user data is oftentimes monetized without their consent, which is kind of a growing problem as time goes on, and as we've seen through many news articles as well. And so here, really don't have to take my word for it for the these permissions or capabilities. Here is a list of capabilities from a malicious extension that I found a few weeks ago. And so if we look here, I've kind of colored the interesting ones in this pinkish color that you see. So they're able to read all of your URLs. They're able to access all of the cookies. And for those of you that don't know, an example usage of a cookie would be an authentication cookie. And so basically what happens is when you log into a site like Facebook, say, you create a cookie that says that you have successfully logged in. And then that stores a bit of an authentication token there. And so that way, when you refresh pages or go and move about your session, browsing through Facebook, you don't have to re-authenticate every single time. It uses that cookie to re-authenticate you. And that way you don't have to enter your password. The problem here is if I have access to your cookies, I can effectively steal your session. I can take that cookie, inject it into my browser, and effectively steal your session there and log in as you without needing access to your password. So there's kind of two avenues that you can go there, right? You can get the clipboard, as we'll see, or go for cookies, but either of these allow for very good session takeovers. So we also have access. These also have the capabilities to manipulate tabs, and that's how many of these extensions are designed to do, right? Create new tabs and things like that. We can also completely control the web requests that are made, and also block those web requests if needed. So that could be a very interesting use case. They could actually potentially block your access to software that could potentially remediate the malicious extension on the computer. Another thing is bookmarks, right? Typically, the vast majority of us have a long list of bookmarks of things we find interesting. So they'll have access to that as well. Your history, your top sites, and your active tab, the tab that you're actively using, they'll have access to that as well, in addition to all of your browser data. And as I mentioned before, your clipboard read and write capabilities as well. And once we get to the column on the right-hand side, this is when things start to get a little bit more interesting. And what a lot of people don't realize is that while these extensions are attached to the browser, they have full capabilities in terms of accessing your whole system. And so what I mean by that is they're able to just actually take full desktop captures, so they can just watch everything that you are doing. And I've caught many malicious extensions taking screenshots of corporate users in a corporate environment, and encode that screenshot and then exfiltrate it out. And so this kind of opens up a whole whirlwind of possibilities when it comes to privacy. Also, access to your downloads, like I mentioned before, your geolocation, your identity, and so that's interesting because that allows the extension to use the Chrome Identity API, or Application Programming Interface, to get the authentication access tokens. So big potential for abuse there as well. And the idle is pretty interesting as well, because it allows the individual on the other end, or the extension, to detect when the machine's state changes, right? Whether or not you're using the computer. And that's pretty interesting, right? Because then you could, and what we've seen is, in some cases, the extension will only be active when the users are idle, meaning that when you walk away from your computer, that's when the extension goes to work and starts harvesting all of your data, because you're not going to notice it. And so it's a pretty interesting use case there. And the native messaging there is that allows this Chrome extension to talk to basically any process or application within on your computer as well. And some other capabilities here: page capture, right? That goes back to that desktop capture that we just talked about. Printer provider, again, access all the documents that you're printing, and a lot of times we're printing sensitive documents. access to the the privacy sections of Chrome and the system as a whole, proxy as well, right? So they could effectively reroute your traffic through their servers, and decrypt all of your encrypted channels that way, and go through and basically just spy on you from that way, and just reroute your traffic. As I mentioned earlier, with the cookies and the possible with the cookies and being able to steal sessions, this is going to have access to all of your sessions as well. And then you can see here, right, the system CPU, display, memory, and storage, in addition to tab capture. So we're able to really, kind of, for lack of a better word, play with the entire system, and therefore the user and all of their data as well. And as we can see here, right, we've got HTTP and HTTPS, and these asterisks simply just say that they're wildcards. So effectively able to read all of your all of the data that goes on during these connections. So very interesting, permissions and capabilities from these extensions, and seeing them being used and abused is certainly very interesting. So let's start, kind of hopping into some use cases here to really understand the power that these have, right? I mean, it's great to look at a list of capabilities, but it's another thing to see them in action. And so what we have here is a browser extension, querying the Active Directory. And so you can see up here, it's making a post request as an admin and performing a quick search. And you can see the host. I've obfuscated this out, but you can see AD, which stands for Active Directory, at customer.com. And the interesting thing here is that whenever Chrome extensions are utilized and initiate connections, they will actually interject a what is known as a origin header. And so when you look at the traffic, through the lens of a network traffic analysis solution, such as Awake, we're able to clearly see when this Chrome extension was responsible for the initiation of a connection, right? When this is the true origin of the connection. So this was not something that necessarily the user may have done or may not have done, but we know that it was initiated from the extension itself. And so the interesting thing here is that we can easily go through and take this value out, Chrome extension with this random ID, and that is how Chrome extensions are recognized by computers and on the web store as well. And so we can see a quick Google of this value can see that it's actually missing, the Google Chrome store is missing this. So in other words, Google does not approve of this browser extension. And furthermore, there's really no open source intelligence information on this extension, which makes it very interesting, right? Because when one considers the Active Directory and how powerful it is within an environment, we know that only a very select few of approved and trusted entities should have access to the Active Directory. And so here's exactly what was happening if we follow the stream, if you will. This is exactly what the Chrome extension was doing, and it was as you can see here, it's actually creating a new user, and then going through and going ahead and changing all of their settings that they can do. And so is a pretty interesting use case, and this was of course a pretty large shock to the firm on the other side of it, on the other end of this. So a very interesting use case, and to be honest, this is the only time that I've actually seen this be utilized. Typically, when I see Chrome extensions, they are usually internal to external connections. This is a very rare case where we've seen internal to internal connections and actually try to you add a new user to the Active Directory. And so essentially what that would mean is that this extension goes out and effectively adds a new user, your malicious actor, and then allows the malicious actor in without setting off any alarms, basically. So it effectively just kind of created them an account and then gave them kind of the keys to the kingdom there. And so now we can see, let's take a look at some malicious behaviors. And so what we can see here is some tracking of users' actions. And so I've underlined some of the interesting sets here. And so we can see is very much in plain English, and while this is code, it is pretty much just plain English for a lot of it. So we can see that we want to track on browser action clicked. So whenever you click something, you're going to track your events. Whenever the page loads, it's going to parse your user data. And again, whenever the page loads, we're going to add a redirect. And then you can see here, we're going to, again, add a redirect when the page loads, but we're going to wait some time now. So that's kind of interesting. And I think, I'm sure plenty of us have experienced this when you go to a website and then, a few seconds later, either a new tab opens up or, a big pop-up comes up. And, not really sure necessarily where it came from because, we were just reading an article or, going about our business on LinkedIn, or if you will. And so the other thing is, it'll actually specify where it's redirecting to. And then it'll also, update its configuration. So it'll update the information that it knows about you and is tracking about you with every time that you update, your web page, basically. And so something that I alluded to earlier, right, and we discussed a little bit earlier, was the usage of cookies and the potential for abuse when it comes to cookies. And so what we can see here is this is, slightly decoded information, but this screenshot down here at the bottom under scraping cookies was found from, I found an extension basically capturing this data on a user's machine and then encoding it and sending it out of the network back to its command and control infrastructure. And the interesting thing is here, right? So they obviously took a step to encode the information, which was rather trivial to decode. It was simply base 64 encoded. But the interesting thing here, right, is as we can see what's highlighted is they were actively looking for cookie stores and cookies. So they're looking very much for specific items. But as we can see, there's no accessible cookie store found for the current selection or current execution context. So luckily for this user, there's really nothing to be found there. But nonetheless, they're still looking for it and still trying to harvest those cookies. So we won't spend a whole lot of time on here just because there's a kind of a bit of a jumbled screenshot. But what I do want to note is the things kind of highlighted in red here. This is a persistent mechanism. So when people think about malware or things like that, one of the things that we look for as incident responders is the presence for the indication that some kind of persistence on the device, right? And so we can see that this is going to be just fully on the device, right? Once you install it, it's going to be there until you uninstall it. And furthermore, we can see that they're actively looking for your query is going to be your search terms. And then we can see they're just kind of tracking everything that we're looking for. So films, games, sports, videos, news, games, and films, whatnot. And so it looks like this user just opened up a Google tab here, and it's just going to track everything that is going on in that tab. And so here's a bit of an interesting piece. And there's been arguments back and forth over the last few years over who actually owns what data and who should be paid for that data, the monetization of that data, right? And so if somebody is making money off of the data that they're harvesting from me and my usage of the internet or usage of a tool, there's a lot of arguments out there that say that I should be the one that gets paid for that, not the people that are selling my data, because it's not necessarily theirs to sell, if you will. But the interesting thing here is they are going to monetize this, the data that they're collecting here. And so I mentioned something earlier about tracking geolocation. And so here's just a bit of a snippet here, and we can see here's your geo data, your IP address, your city, your country name, your state, your longitude, your latitude, and that's what I was saying earlier. You can get within the realm of a cul-de-sac there, and then again, even some more stuff. Where your time zone, continent, country code, metro code, postal code or zip code, the internet speed you're getting, whether or not it's corporate or private, the ISP, and then the organization. So in this case, this actually leaked the organization's name. And then some interesting notes about the whether or not you use imperial or metrics for your weather and whatnot. And so finally, down at the bottom of the page, we can see what I've highlighted is all of the allowed data types for the particular extension that we're looking at. And so as you can see right off the bat, a lot of them, so here we can see, allowed types, doc, docx, XLS. So we've got your Word documents, Excel, PDF, all of your images, your Word documents, and so on and so forth. So it continues to go on. We can even see, Amazon ebooks are in there, and things like that. So rather interesting, right? When you consider, okay, they're actually able to harvest all of the images and Word documents and PDF documents and all that. So in effect, there's really nothing safe from these extensions, and very few people are actively looking at these types of things, right? They're just saying, okay, this looks like a useful functionality. I'd love to be able to convert a Word document to a PDF, and from a PDF back to a Word document within my browser. That would be a useful tool. However, in order to do that, it has access to all of those things. And then, as it turns out, that was actually potentially developed by a malicious actor. And so kind of stepping into some, how do we detect this, right? How do we go about hunting this and detecting this within a corporate environment? And so let's first take a look at downloading extensions outside the Chrome store, right? Because one would say that if you have an extension and you're proud of it and you want to share it with users, put it on the Chrome store, right? Why not? Because when you put it on the Chrome store, there's a potential for you to make money from it, right? There's ways to monetize all kinds of things, but nonetheless, and maybe you want to put it on the Chrome store so that you can track your metrics of how many people downloaded or daily active users or things like that. But if you develop a malicious extension, you're not going to want to put that on the Chrome store because you're going to want this to fly as far under the radar as possible, to really stay as long, on the victim's machine as long as possible. And so what we see here is, a quick screenshot of the Awake workbench, and we can see is, we actually have a model to detect this, right? Download Chrome extension downloaded outside of the Chrome store. So we're looking for .crx files outside of the sanctioned Chrome store. .crx is the extension file type for Chrome extensions. And so for this instance that we see right here, which is at the beginning of April, we can see a quick call out for a GET request for this .crx file. And oh, by the way, this extension is known to be malicious. So a pretty interesting use case here. And so another way that we can do this is looking for extensions based on their headers. That's something that I mentioned earlier, right, with the origin. And so as I mentioned earlier, whenever a Chrome extension is responsible for initiating connection, there will be an origin header in there that says, here's your Chrome extension ID. And so as a result of that, we're able to look at header values. And so in this instance, we're looking for a regular expression match for the header value itself. And as we can see, just a quick search of that brings up a whole bunch. So let's move forward here. And so going down a little bit deeper to take a look at this, the actual extracted data or the metadata from this particular connection. And this is exactly what I was saying. Here is your origin. You can see your header name and value key pair. Here's your origin right there. And then you can quickly look and Google that to see if it's registered on the Chrome store or unregistered. And so while we can go through and do this manually, Awake will actually do this for us automatically. And so Ava, which is the Awake virtual assistant, kind of our cloud expert system that is really designed to automate a lot of the legwork that an analyst will do on a daily basis, such as open source intelligence research. And so this instance, right, if we see here, we can see a quick, this is a small screenshot from one of the devices profile within the Awake platform. And so we can see we triggered a model for C2, unregistered Chrome extension, connection to risky domain. And so looking at the, clicking on this and then looking at the actual HTTP traffic from it, we can see that they are making a post request out to a config. And then we can see, there is a decent bit of data going out there, right? The content length. And they're sending out JSON or just plain text, right? And again, here's the origin of that connection is this Chrome extension ID. And so what Ava will do is it'll actually take this value and it'll go ahead and it'll Google it and it'll say, okay, Chrome store does not have this value on it. And therefore, let's trigger this unregistered model. So it's kind of this circular loop of, okay, we see an extension. Is this on the Google store? No, it is not. Okay, let's trigger a model now. And the nice thing about that is that's previously things that I would do as an analyst that take up time and energy and forces me to switch context a little bit. And so taking that legwork out, out from underneath me, that really places an emphasis on the analyst to make a decision of whether or not this is justified or unjustified behavior, right? So we can easily determine that, should this user be doing, have this Chrome extension on them? That's a quick conversation with the user. You're able to kind of deduce that information pretty quickly. What are they trying to achieve with this, and what is their use case there? And then looking at the permissions, we can pretty much very quickly understand whether or not this should or should not be on the network. And so something we need to talk about here is mitigation, right? Okay, so now that we know that these can really interact with all pieces of data within the browser, as well as outside of the browser, right? We've seen it interact with the Active Directory. We've seen it track users' data, monetize their data, and so on and so forth, and really just violate a lot of users' privacy, because at this point, if you've got an extension, and even further a malicious extension, your data is actively being harvested and potentially used against you, whether you realize it or not. So, how do we handle this, right? How do we handle thousands of users in a corporate environment that are all susceptible to this, that all have, again, O365 right in the browser and all of that corporate secrets right in the browser, ready to be harvested? How do we handle that as IT admins? And so we can't really rely on Google because, as a lot of those articles that I mentioned, in the beginning here with a lot of the article titles indicate, is that there's a lot of actually malicious activity going on in the actual Chrome store itself. So therefore, we really cannot rely on Google to solve this problem. We need to kind of take matters into our own hands and solve things that way. And so we've got some options, right? We can, and there's a few different ways. We can block the extension based on their specific permissions, right? Do they have access to the USB ports? If they do, then we can block it based on that. We can also do it based on specific policies as well. And we can use the Google Admin Console. So for those that use the Chrome browser cloud management or the enterprise Chrome, that will allow you to holistically control the extensions that are allowed or denied and blocked within your environment. So that's probably one of the easiest ways to go about it, although it may not be the cheapest. But another way we can go about it is through Windows group policy. We can create group policy objects to really understand and look for certain permissions or things like that, whether it's based on the Chrome extension ID itself, the permissions it has, or some of the websites it uses. We can go through and block or allow based on that through group policy objects. So yeah, there's a lot to be done here. I think that there's, as a security world, I think we've really just kind of started opening the big can of worms here when it comes to browser extensions, their power, and the data that they are using and abusing within a corporate environment. So with that, thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And I hope that this was useful and you picked something up along the way. So thank you very much. And as always, with any questions, here's my email address. I'm happy to address them there. Or if any questions now, happy to answer them now as well.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. We did have a few questions come in. I did want to thank you for your insights, and we also got some pretty flattering comments on the chat saying they appreciated your insights too. So thanks again. So I'll just remind everyone, if you've got questions, definitely drop them to the Q&A channel. We did have a few that already came in, so Eric, in kind of order of these coming in, you discussed some ways of hunting for this Chrome extension attacker technique. I guess a more basic question that this person has is, why isn't this caught by my endpoint security tools, right? Like any other endpoint malware. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of these are kind of missed by your endpoint technologies because of the way that they're actually installed, right? They go pretty much specifically straight into the browser, and a lot of the your endpoint technologies are going to look at the processes that are running, and the actions that those processes take. And so for this, for extensions, the processes that the endpoint solution basically thinks that when an extension gets kicked off, they think that it's just Chrome and the user actually doing it. So they don't really typically see any issue with the actions that are going on because the endpoint technology assumes that the user is doing it, not the actual extension itself.
That makes sense. Next question, as a security professional, and maybe they're asking what you do, but do you recommend we just ban Chrome extensions entirely within our organization? Is there like a permissions model that allows me to control what these extensions can and cannot do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it depends on the firm itself, right? The enterprise environment itself, right? And the regulations that they are subjected to, and the kind of compliance models that they need to follow. But I think a general rule of thumb is a lot of the extensions that I've seen are they are just like kind of shorthand ways or designed to be shorthand ways to perform functions that we can already do within the operating system itself, such as converting documents, from Word to PDF. Well, that's something that we can just, save the file in question as a different file type. So from that point of view, there's a lot of these extensions are not needed. And so, for some organizations with a, very low risk tolerance, that it may be worthwhile for them to just block them altogether until, the kind of security world and Google catches up to where these extensions really lie and the risks that they pose. But with that being said, I think the best option would be to carefully examine all the extensions that are in your environment, right? Get a list of what is currently running, and then understand the use cases behind them, and then the permissions that are used. And then probably, if you guys are a Windows shop, utilize Windows group policy objects to go ahead and deny those based on permissions. And as we saw, in one of the slides earlier, there's quite an extensive array of permissions and capabilities that these have. And so I would limit based on the permissions, based on use cases, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Eric. And we have a couple of kind of related questions to this as well. So, so one question is, I guess they're asking for your own experience. When you look at the Chrome store, are there any kind of immediate red flags that jump out at you of, hey, this kind of looks like a sketchy extension, or is that not really the case?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely a few kind of telltale signs, right? You want to look at some of the things that I personally look at when investigating these are the number of downloads, right? I mentioned some of the statistics earlier on the downloads, right? 50% of these extensions really don't have pretty much any users, right? 90% of these extensions have less than 1,000 downloads, and so when we look at the Chrome, the Chrome store, those numbers are going to be heavily inflated for the suspicious and the malicious ones, right? We may say something that might be designed to convert file types that is potentially malicious, that is on the Chrome store, they might boast about having 2, 3, 4 million downloads, when in fact statistically that's just very inaccurate. So I would look at the number of downloads, right? Does that seem accurate based on some of the research that's out there, based on like some of the statistics that I provided? there's this company out there called Extension Monitor, and they've pretty much built their whole existence on monitoring extensions and keeping tabs on the Google Chrome store, the Chrome Web Store. And so I'd kind of fact check against them to see where they stand on the latest statistics with their scans. But yeah, I would say anything with an overwhelmingly large user presence. And then also kind of cross-check that with the reviews, right? If we've got 5 million reviews and a 5-star rating, that's pretty rare, because how often do you see 5 million people give a 5-star rating, right? There's typically some mixed emotions in there and whatnot, and so I would look for things that are akin to that, the interesting proportion to the reviews, the ratings, and the downloads as well.
And then Eric, this might be a little bit of a stumper, because I don't know if you're a Windows admin necessarily, but the question is a kind of two-part. As a Windows systems administrator, can I block non-chromestore extensions? So that's the first part. I'll let you answer that and then come to the second part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So whether or not, no matter how it was downloaded, it's still going to go into the browser, and it's still going to require certain permissions on the computer. And so the user is going to have to allow those permissions. So whether it was downloaded from the Chrome Web Store or sneakily hidden with other downloads, we can still block those through, as I mentioned earlier, the usage of group policy objects to block them based on the permissions that they request as well.
Cool. And then the second part of the question, which is along the same lines of, can I do this as a Windows administrator, is can I use the same origin policy to block what these extensions are capable of doing, or which domains they're allowed to talk to, et cetera?
Yeah, so extensions, they come with typically a few files, right? So they're written in JavaScript, and then they have what's called a manifest file. And this manifest file typically outlines all of the permissions and capabilities that are needed of this, as well as all of the domains that they're going to talk to. And so typically, if a domain's not included in the within that manifest, there might have some significant issues actually communicating with that domain. So from that point of view, you could utilize the manifest sectionality of it, or because the manifest is included with every extension, including mine, which my personal one that I built that is not on the Chrome Web Store, that I still have to abide by the usage of the manifest. Right? That's kind of how they operate. So from that point of view, I think the answer is yes.
Okay, but I think your point though is if you're writing a malicious extension, there's nothing to prevent you from adding whatever you want into the manifest, right? It would be up to the auditor to kind of go look for that and block it. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's definitely a fair statement.
Okay. Yeah, we had another question about the same origin policy, but I think you basically covered that. Again, I'll remind folks, if you've got questions, definitely keep them coming in the Q&A channel. We've got one more question. And this might be a little bit of a political question, I guess. Is this a Chrome problem, or does this affect other browsers? And is Google doing anything about it?
Yeah. So, is it a Chrome problem? I would say no. I would say I think Chrome has just gotten the most attention for it, just based on market share. Right? They are the overwhelming kind of majority leader in terms of utilization and market share. So I think that's why a lot of the attention is placed on them. But yeah, definitely don't be fooled. Firefox is just as susceptible. It's got the same capabilities as well as other major browsers as well. So yeah, while a lot of the emphasis is on Chrome, I think that emphasis is placed there because of strictly just the market share of Chrome and the kind of market reach that they have. So just I think the overall security world and whatnot is kind of just going after the kind of biggest fish first, if you will, trying to fry the biggest fish. But with that being said, I've seen plenty of these be installed on Firefox and other browsers as well.
Cool. So it sounds like it's a little bit like, why historically most malware was targeted at Windows systems. There was just more Windows systems to target.
Exactly, and interesting actually. It's funny you bring that up. I believe there's now there's a larger increase in malware written for non-Windows machines such as Linux and Mac than there is being actively developed for Windows machines. As we see that market share kind of change. So, malicious actors, right? They're just going for the most bang for their buck. And so if there's, if 70%, 60, 70% of the market uses Chrome, then we're going to start with Chrome. And once we make our money there, then then we can shift over to other browsers and start going after them as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the points you made, Eric, that Chrome extensions actually let you be platform agnostic, right? Because the same extension works on a Mac, works on Windows, probably works on a phone even. So there's two levels of platform agnosticism, if you will, that are going on here.
Yeah, absolutely, and I've certainly actually seen them on mobile phones as well, and that was actually a really interesting piece of portion of my research was, investigating these on mobile devices, and so I've actually seen some malicious extensions download some APK files or Android Android files, so they've got their extension on their on their mobile device because, right, Chrome, once you sign into Chrome, you can sign in on your phone and you'll have that same capabilities on your phone, your tablet, and your browser. And the extension can potentially, if you set the settings right, that extension can actually be downloaded onto all of them as a result of you logging into your profile. So yeah, it's definitely pretty interesting how pervasive they can be and how much they will follow you. And then again, that interesting piece I was talking about is downloading Android files. So the particular user in question had a malicious extension on their desktop and as well as on their phone. And as a result of that, their phone ended up getting compromised, right? Because if you see all the extension capabilities, right, they're basically already compromising the entire device, with access to the whole background system and operating system as a whole. But then they went after their phone. And so now at this point, they're watching everything you do online, every text message you send, every Instagram picture you look at, and every call that you make. So from that point of view, you lose every single piece of privacy that you thought you had.
Yeah, in fact, one of the attendees made a comment that just recently, I guess, with Edge, Microsoft Edge now being, Chromium based, apparently Edge is also pointing their extension store to the Google Chrome store. So it's the question about, is this a Google problem or is it a Chrome problem? That's another data point that, yeah, this is a more widespread browser problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it becomes easier and easier as things switch over to that Chromium base because that, like you said, that we don't care at that point if it's Mac, Windows, or Linux. We've seen them on all.
Yep. And I think the last part of that question, Eric, was what's your experience been with Google and how they react to kind of reports of malicious Chrome extensions, et cetera?
Yeah, certainly. So I think I personally have mixed reviews. I've worked with Google a decent bit to work to get these extensions off the store because I find plenty of malicious extensions that are still available for download on the store. And so they really are doing their best. They are working with individuals like myself and other corporations. I believe Duo posted a pretty big article as well, and they worked with an independent researcher. And then the independent researcher, Duo, and Chrome all work together to take down a few hundred extensions. And that's all great, right? It's great when we see 50, 100, 200 extensions taken down from the store. But the fact of the matter is, there's over 200,000 of them, right? That is a very difficult number to keep track of, to go through each and every one of those, reverse engineer them, and understand exactly how they're going to act in an environment. That's a lot to keep up with, and something that's they're clearly struggling to keep up with it because my researchers like myself and other individuals out there are still able to find malicious extensions that are available on the Chrome store. But with that being said, they from what I can tell, they really are doing their best. They're pretty responsive to myself and other researchers that look into these types of topics. So I think we're playing catch up, but it's nice to see that they are willing to work with individuals and like myself and companies like Awake and other researchers out there to put their best foot forward and really work to take these malicious extensions off of their Chrome store.
Excellent. Yeah, it sounds a little bit like the Android app store challenge too, right? Where you can sideload apps, etc. So it's good to know that they're working with you. One kind of related question to that is, from your experience hunting, do you have a sense of how often you run into kind of Chrome store extensions versus the unregistered extensions? I don't know if you have a stat at the top of your head.
Yeah, I would say the vast majority are unregistered at this point. And I think I've seen that shift over the last 18 months. I think when I really started my research on these and kind of doing mass scans to find them and whatnot, I think I was finding a much closer, kind of more of a 50-50 split between registered and unregistered. But I would say as time goes on, as more of those Wired and Forbes articles comes out, which clearly say, hey, these extensions are malicious and all of that. And so as Google and the world has started to kind of shed some light on this topic, I've really seen those numbers go from, something like a 50-50 distribution to more of like a 60-40, possibly even, 65-35 portion where, 65 to 70% of the extensions that I come across are unregistered. And then some are registered. But I think the point that I want to make here, right, is whether or not they're registered or unregistered. A lot of them do have those extreme permissions, and so there's some popular ones out there. And it's actually one of the let's see here. Okay, no, I was gonna say it's not one of the ones that's been downloaded more than 10 million times, but I believe it's got over 1 million downloads. But there's a few out there that are registered and very, very popular that are, their goal is to watch all of the things you do online with regards to your shopping. And I think there's an asterisk there, right, that they're only going to pay attention to when you're shopping on certain sites. But their goal is to say that if you're shopping for an item on just the internet, it'll compare prices against Amazon, for example, or let's say you're shopping for home goods stuff. It'll cross-check prices at Amazon, Home Depot, and Lowe's, and your local hardware stores and things like that. But as a result, it still has to, even though that is registered and developed by a reputable company that is built their existence upon this cross price tracking and getting users the best prices possible across the internet. It still needs those permissions, right? It's still going to violate your privacy. And so I think even when it comes to the registered ones, I think that we need to be very wary because, myself and other researchers are still, working with Google on a near weekly basis to get some of these off of the Chrome store. But yeah, I will say that as we work with Google and as Google sheds more light on this topic, that we're definitely seeing a larger, an increase of unregistered extensions found in corporate environments.
Excellent. Yeah, I think this is probably our last, it's more like a comment than a question, actually. One of the attendees pointed out that, they've seen cases where, the extension is used to steal like AWS credentials, and then they've seen someone logging in with those AWS credentials. So almost like, I think we've been referring to it as lateral movement from on-premise to the cloud, but I don't know if, Eric, you've run into anything like that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say one of the most interesting ones that I came across, and I actually purposefully did not include it in this webinar, just because I think the company in question, or the company that's being abused, is taking a lot of heat recently, and a lot of people would like to kind of blame them for being unsecure or whatnot. But realistically, they're doing the best they can and making changes very, very quickly. And the company I'm talking about is Zoom, and so there are vulnerabilities. And there's been vulnerabilities released, here and there over the last year or so when it comes to Zoom. But I think one of the largest ones that they had was the ability to what they call a Zoom bomb, and such that if you have the URL or the meeting ID number, then you're able to go and sit in on that meeting, whether or not you were invited or anything else. If you have that ID, you're allowed in. And so we found a Chrome extension that was, unregistered, right? Really no signs of this anywhere. Just couldn't find any users on it, or really anything on open source intelligence for this extension. And it was actually scraping Zoom URLs as well. And then I want to say about 3 months later, the news broke that it was possible to, I think other security researchers realized that there was a really big hole there. And so this extension was, in that environment for a few months, and then, they went through a trial with Awake, and we pointed that out once they, kind of went through their trial with Awake. And, they did some remediation and were able to find that it was on the endpoint for a few months. And we said, hey, they're scraping Zoom URLs, and that's a pretty big deal. But then, like I said, about 2-3 months later, we found out that, they're probably using that for malicious purposes and spying on Zoom meetings.
That's super interesting, because it's kind of amazing how the attack surface has really dramatically changed.
Yeah, absolutely. And along those lines, I think we experienced a very similar use case that that the individual who made the comment. We experienced a very interesting use case, and as part of our research, some of the team members at Awake, some of the researchers here, actually built a Chrome extension that does exactly that. Right, it goes in and it steals their AWS credentials, and it will kind of immediately log in to them and potentially even reset the password and go on to do more nefarious activities afterwards. So yeah, I mean, those capabilities are very real, and they're actively being used and abused and used against us, really.
Yeah, no wonder the attackers view these as the keys to the kingdom. Excellent. Eric, thanks so much. I think that's all the questions we had. To the audience, appreciate your time and your comments and your questions. If you have any other questions, definitely don't hesitate to reach out to us at Awake or to Eric. Thank you everyone for attending. If you would like to share or view the recording, these are always available on Awake's YouTube channel. We look forward to seeing you at the next Awake Security webinar, where we'll actually be talking about full kill chain reconstruction. So visit us at awakesecurity.com/webinars to sign up. And we hope you have a great rest of the day and a great weekend starting tomorrow. Take care.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Take care.